Hello and welcome to this introduction to the world of Total War Elysium. I'm your host, MrSmartDonkey, and in this video I'll be taking you through all the things that set Elysium apart from other collectible card games, or CCGs as I will refer to them as from now on. I'm going to be covering features such as the completely unique Daybreak mechanic, deck building, and the different generals and factions that you will encounter and you might know from other Total War games. If Elysium is your first step into the world of CCGs, this video will still give you plenty of information too. But if things get too advanced, do not worry. Elysium has an in-game tutorial that will take you through all of the basics. Finally, before we start, I'd like to mention that Elysium is currently in closed beta, so anything you see is subject to change. Now then, let's start at the beginning. Deck building. First things first. What you might refer to as a deck in most CCGs is actually called reserves in Elysium. You do have a deck, but your deck is built from your reserves in-game, which might sound confusing, but I'll explain it all in detail later. Before you choose your reserves, you'll need to choose a general to lead your cards on the battlefield. As of right now, there are a total of 7 generals in the game, spanning across 3 different factions in 3 different eras. The 3 eras in the game cover key historical ages, and the different technology and weaponry used during those ages. For example, the medieval era is all about shields and solid infantry, whereas the Empire era is focused on artillery and gunpowder. More generals and factions will be added over time, but let's focus on those available right now. Each general is part of a faction. For example, both Lagertha and Guthrum are part of the Viking faction, and Napoleon and Marie Antoinette are part of the French Republic faction. Each faction then falls into a specific era. For example, the Viking faction is part of the medieval era, and the French Republic faction is part of the Empire era. As of right now, there is only a single faction for each era, but as more factions get added, the different eras will become more and more diverse. Let's build reserves using Napoleon as an example. As I said, Napoleon is part of the French Republic faction, which allows you to use cards from the French Republic. And because the French Republic is part of the Empire era, you are allowed to use cards from the Empire era as well. Finally, there's the Timeless set of cards, which, as the name suggests, are not limited to any specific era, so they can be used in the reserves of any general, similar to neutral cards from other CCGs. So now that you've chosen your general, and you know which cards you're able to add to your reserves, you'll notice Elysium has a relatively small reserve size compared to most other popular CCGs, coming in at only 18 cards. The reason for this is the unique Daybreak mechanic, which is possibly Elysium's most unique feature. Let's take a quick sidestep from reserves building and into the game to explain the Daybreak mechanic. Total War Elysium's turns are divided by parts of the day, from sunrise till night, making a total of 7 turns. The game starts with the first Daybreak, which is when you will pick 9 out of your 18 reserves. These 9 cards make up your in-game deck and are the only ones that you'll be drawing until the next Daybreak, at which point you will take 9 more cards from your reserves, which will be added to the leftover cards from the first Daybreak. Upon the next Daybreak you will do this again, and again, and again, until you either win, lose, or draw. It is very possible to draw your entire in-game deck before the next Daybreak, but there are no downsides to doing so like fatigue, so draw to your heart's content. Your reserves refresh after every Daybreak, so you will always have enough cards to choose from. There are a few anomalies here that require mentioning too, for example the card Messenger, which draws a card from your reserves rather than your deck, which means you cannot choose the card that you draw during your next Daybreak as you've already drawn it. Similarly, any legendary cards that you add to your reserves can only be drawn once per game, so once you've chosen to add them from your reserves to your in-game deck, you don't get the option of adding them again during the next Daybreak. Now that you understand the Daybreak mechanic, you will understand the logic behind the 18 card reserves. Reserves are built from 3 different card types: units, structures, and events. Units are your minions from other CCGs. They can attack, maneuver between lines, and get attacked. I'll talk about the different lines later. Structures are immovable, can't attack unless they have short or long ranged, I'll talk about what those are later as well, and can be attacked. And finally, events are your spells from other CCGs. They can be anything from deal 1 damage to everything, to deploying a peasantry for each enemy unit and structure. You will only be able to add a single copy of a card to your reserves, because you can then choose that card once every Daybreak if you wish, allowing you to draw it as frequently or as infrequently as you want. Due to the way Daybreak works, you are essentially able to always have a solid curve by choosing your low cost cards in early game and your more expensive cards in the late game. However, this is where thinking ahead comes into play. If you choose to only take your low cost cards early on, you might end up running out of steam too quickly, whereas your opponent might have only taken a few low cost cards to get going and taken a few more expensive cards to set up his combos earlier. So Daybreak might sound like an easy way to get your perfect curve every game, but there's a lot more strategy involved than you might think, which should come to no surprise in the Total War franchise. A final thing of import to mention that you will want to keep in mind when building your reserves is that the hand limit size in Elysium is 12, including your signature card, so 11 cards from your deck can be held in hand at any one time, meaning you're able to hold more combo pieces at once if that's what you're going for. Let's go into a little bit more detail on generals and factions. Let's stick to the French Republic for our examples. Each faction has a unique mechanic. For the French Republic, this is the plan mechanic. If a card in your hand has the tag plan on it, it will gain a bonus after the next Daybreak. Take Calibrated Ordnance, for example. By default, this deals free damage to any target for free supply, mana in other CCGs, which is okay, but if it's planned, it'll also add 2 round shots to your hand, a 1 cost to deal 1 damage to any target, which just gives the card a lot more value. With every faction having a unique mechanic, it really sets them all apart from each other, especially once we start seeing multiple factions per era. Similarly, each general is unique from one another, not only in their attack and health, but also their signature card, which can be likened to a hero power in other CCGs, as well as their passive ability. This is especially important because a general in Elysium isn't just watching from the sidelines, they are an entity on the battlefield, and will fight alongside your units. You have to be careful though, because if your general dies, you lose. Napoleon, for example, has 1 attack and 20 health, whereas Marie Antoinette has 0 attack and the same 20 health. Other generals might have 25 health or even 30. Napoleon's signature card is Logistics, which is a 2 cost card that gets him 1 extra supply or 2 extra supply if it's planned on the next turn. This allows him to play some expensive cards earlier than otherwise possible, or even get more supply than the maximum of 10. His passive gives him a free foot artillery unit deployment at the start of the game, which is a small 1 attack 2 health artillery piece with short ranged. Going back to Marie Antoinette, her signature card is Revolt, which is a 9 cost card that changes Marie Antoinette into a revolutionary mob and changes her signature card to Arm the Mob, which gives 3 different units a small buff. Marie Antoinette's passive decreases the cost of Revolt by 1 whenever a friendly unit dies, and when she turns into the revolutionary mob, her passive spawns 2 peasants at the end of each of her turns. I'd love to go into detail about all the things I just said, but Marie Antoinette is a very unique general, and you'll learn all of these things once you see her in game. The point is, every general is very different from the others, even when they're from the same faction. There is, however, one thing all generals have in common, which is their Last Gasp ability. Last Gasp is a keyword that is unique to generals, and triggers once they get damaged below 7 health. It doesn't matter how much damage they took while they were above 7 health, they will never go below 6, so even if you deal 100 damage to a general on 7 health, as long as it hasn't triggered its Last Gasp yet, it will still end up on 6 health. This means that 1 turn kills simply aren't possible. This is because the general becomes unbreakable, which makes them immune to all damage for the duration of that turn. They also immediately draw 2 cards to give them a little more fuel to work with. Now that we've had a proper look at reserves, generals, and factions, it's time to have a look at the battlefield. One of the most important differences from other CCGs on the battlefield is the addition of lines. There's 2 lines, the front line and the back line. Both lines are for the most part the same, but there are a few key differences that are very important. To explain this, I will be using some terminology that I will explain right after this, so bear with me. Units on the back row cannot attack enemies on the front row unless they have short or long ranged, and to attack enemies on the enemy back row they'll need long ranged. Similarly, units on your front row can only attack enemies on the enemy front row unless they have either short ranged, long ranged, or flanking. Units with flanking on the front row also can't be targeted by units on the back row. Units with short or long range never return fire when attacked, making them extra vulnerable. Similarly, they also don't take return fire when hitting enemies, so they are great at picking off enemies for free, but also die more easily. Normal units attacking each other do trade health though. It's also worth mentioning there is an exception to all the rules I just stated, which is that when there's nothing to attack on the enemy front line, the units on your front line are free to attack the enemies on the back line, even if they don't have short ranged, long ranged, or flanking. That brings us to card terminology, which will finally allow you to understand all the terms I've been throwing around. I'll start with the globally available ones and then move on to those that are faction specific. For comparison, I'll be using terminology from Hearthstone where available, as it is one of the more well-known CCGs. Starting us off is Herald, which does something when it's played from your hand, and can be likened to a battle cry. Then there's Shattered, which does something when it's destroyed, and can be likened to a death rattle. Next is Fast Attack, which allows it to perform an action the turn it's played, and can be likened to Charge. Shield allows you to ignore the first time you take damage, also known as Divine Shield. Stun causes an enemy to miss their next move or attack, aka Freeze. Splash deals damage to enemies adjacent to the target. Maneuver does something when it's moved from one line to the other. Flanking allows a unit to attack enemies on the edges of the back row from the front row. Short ranged allows a unit to attack over one line, but doesn't return fire when attacked. Long ranged allows a unit to attack enemies anywhere, but also doesn't return fire when attacked. Camouflage makes a unit unable to be targeted until it attacks, but also can't form a front line, and can be likened to stealth. Extra actions allows a unit to act more than once per turn, which can be compared to Wind Fury or Mega Wind Fury, except extra actions aren't limited to a certain number. Some units can get many extra actions per turn if certain conditions are met. Finally, there's the two we already discussed when talking about generals, which makes you immune to all damage, and Last Gasp, which makes a general unbreakable for a turn and draws them 2 cards. Out of the 3 factions, I've already explained one unique mechanic, the French Republic's Plan. That still leaves the Vikings and Free Kingdoms though. The Vikings' unique mechanic is Raid, which makes whatever carries this keyword cost 1 less supply for each damaged unit or structure on the battlefield, on both your and your enemy's side. This allows for some incredible tempo plays and allows a certain Viking general to be the ultimate aggro queen. Then there's the Free Kingdoms unique mechanic, which is Mandate, which does something whenever you target it with a friendly card. There's a few cards with Mandate that allow for some crazy things to happen, like giving everyone an extra action every time you trigger the Mandate ability, which makes for some very spicy combos. Finally, I want to take a minute to talk about the in-game rewards you get from playing Total War Elysium, and inevitably, the store. Since Elysium is a free-to-play title, there is of course going to be a store, but Creative Assembly have tried to go about this in a very fair way. Let me start off by saying that this is still heavily under development, and thus subject to change, but as it stands right now, there's 2 types of currency, gold and amethyst, with the former being earned purely by playing, and the latter which can be earned to a limited extent by playing and bought with real money. Gold is used to buy standard card packs, known as battle packs in Elysium. With amethyst you can currently buy either generals or battle packs. There's 3 types of battle packs in Elysium: regular, epic, and legendary. These battle packs tell you exactly how many cards of each rarity you will obtain. A legendary card, for example, will only ever appear in a legendary pack, so there's no randomness in what rarity you'll get. A regular pack, for example, will always give you 4 common cards, 2 rares, and 20 crafting materials. This is not to say there's no way for you to acquire epic and legendary cards without spending money, as you will of course be able to craft those as well, and you get some for free for just playing the game. Which brings us to the rewards and achievements. First of all, in the current state of the game, you will get free generals and accompanying reserves for free during the first 2 levels: Cao Cao, Lagatha, and Napoleon, 1 for each currently existing faction. You will also earn gold, amethyst, and even battle packs from the standard pack all the way to the legendary pack simply for playing the game and leveling up. Finally, there's the achievement system. Achievements are goals such as winning matches, playing a number of cards, or destroying enemies that all reward you with amethyst upon completion. This is only the first iteration of the achievements, and many more will be added into the game later. Then finally there's the daily quests, which all reward gold upon completion, with which you can buy more battle packs. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that while there is a store, it is certainly not necessary to use it in order to have a good time, as Elysium tries to reward you in as many ways as possible for simply playing it. With that, I believe I've covered just about everything there is to cover about Elysium at this moment. If this video has piqued your interest in Elysium and you haven't signed up for the beta yet, make sure to click the sign up link in the description. You'll find a few other links in the description as well, such as to the Elysium Discord page, the official Elysium FAQ, and a playlist of all my Elysium gameplay. Finally, I want to give a quick thanks to the Elysium development team for reaching out and asking me to make this video. While this isn't a sponsored video, I'm very excited to be given the opportunity to bring it to your attention in this way. If you want to see more Elysium content from me, make sure to subscribe, as I'll be covering this game plenty more in the future. That'll do it for now. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a good day, and goodbye.